opportunity to expound on some of the issues that you've been dealing with, some of the legislation, and we'll ask some questions along the way and go no longer than an hour and proceed. So just tell us what's been going on and
Sure.
what are some of the things you've been working on.
We've had a very interesting session, and not just because it's the first session I've been through. I sit next to Don Moffitt, sits on my right. He's been in, I think he's the second longest serving Republican, and Rich Brower's on my left from the Springfield area. Both those guys have seen sessions come and go, and this one has been really unique in a couple of ways. First, we've been in a lot of days. At this point in the legislative calendar, we usually don't have so many session days. We had quite a few weeks where we went 4 or 5 days, and that's more than usual at this point. Part of that was because of the other unusual thing, which was the speaker designating weekly orders of business. So specifically on topics of firearm legislation and pension reform legislation, he designated, really in the beginning of session, every Tuesday we talked about guns and every Thursday we talked about pensions, and voted on a wide variety of amendments and bills related to each of those. We haven't accomplished anything yet. We haven't really passed anything through, but the speaker's perspective on that was it was a way to have these discussions. I'm not sure what the other political implications in that might have been, but at least it was atypical. You don't normally go into session and say, today we're going to talk only about this. On a normal session day, we jump around to everything, and they kind of proceed through bills in order that they were submitted, a wide variety of topics. So the weekly orders of business really changed things, and we, because of that, had conversations that usually happen towards the end of session when the big influential bills are coming to fruition. We had those starting in January, starting very early in session before we had any opportunity to get through a committee process with those bills, to hear testimony from experts on those, or really to spend much time reading the bills that we were voting on. So at this point, we've talked a lot about the issues that are important today, but we haven't solved anything. We haven't put together any comprehensive plans on that. So because of, I think, that kind of combination of the fact that we did talk about it so much more than usual, but we didn't produce anything, it's made kind of a strange session, a session where we go in knowing that here's the issue of the day, but do we actually intend to take any action on it? You might be talking about taking action, you might be talking about the issue, but until a couple pieces get in place and you put together a more comprehensive bill, you're not going to move anywhere on either of those two issues. So they remain unresolved. The Senate's in this week. We're not. The Senate's taking care of some other bills before they get to their deadline this Friday. So there's we're at this point right now where the crossover will happen. We sent all our bills to the Senate. The Senate's sending all their bills to us, and we'll start over the process and bring ourselves into the end of session.
What's been your biggest surprise since being in the legislature?
That's a great question. A lot of people ask me that. I would say that there's a lot of things that were surprising. Maybe the biggest is just from living the daily life in Springfield is you really gain an appreciation for how many associations there are in the state of Illinois.
Special interests?
Special interests. That's right. I mean, of every kind, and because every association tries to schedule a legislative day while we're in session, and bring their members down to Springfield and interact with government, talk about their priorities. And you really gain an appreciation quickly for the fact that there are so many of them, because every day there's 4 or 5 of these legislative days going on, and you see people all wearing similar shirts or name tags, carrying folders throughout the Capitol, and there's even multiple associations for any specific industry. I mean, we had the Interior Decorators Association come in, then you have things that are a little more ambiguously named, like Progress for Illinois, or something like that. And it's hard to keep all these straight because there are just so many of them. But there's good and bad with that. The bad is just that it's tough to focus on all of those issues when there are so many people talking about such a wide variety of legislation. But the good side of it is, because we vote on so many different things, you get the chance to hear from the people it actually impacts. And they bring members down there. They can tell you some real world stories to add a lot of context before you take some votes that otherwise might look a little different when you're just reading the legislation.
breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I mean, there's
Yeah.
you don't have to buy meals, do you?
There's a lot of receptions, a lot of hors d'oeuvre food going around down there. That's for sure.
But no drinking, I'm sure.
Got to maintain a clear mind.
Yeah.
Well, you've had some legislation pass the House regarding anti-corruption in the wake of the City Hall scandal. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, where that's headed?
Right. So we had two bills that I was the lead sponsor of, and one that I was the chief co-sponsor of, all related to the situation that happened here in Dixon. Two of the bills strengthened the enforcement, or strengthened penalties for offenders. One of them increased the level of felony when you forge a state, or I should say any government invoice or receipt, which we obviously saw was one of the ways that money was transferred from accounts here and maybe clouded the audit trail there. The second one would increase the felony status for theft of public funds. Now that bill was actually sponsored by Representative David Harris, a colleague of mine, and he had received that from a commission that was put together to study the Illinois Criminal Code and make recommendations. And I had another bill out there that did essentially the same thing, so we got together and I just signed on to his bill, and we moved both of those passed through the House. I believe unanimously. I know the bill that I offered was, I'm pretty sure his was too, because they were reasonable, responsible things, recognizing in both cases that when there are theft or when there are forgery involved, involving government bodies and government entities, it affects more than just the crime at hand. It has an impact on the trust that people have in government, the confidence they have in the official nature of government. So both of those were very strongly supported. The third bill, and this was the most recent that I passed, addressed kind of some of the internal controls procedures that are at work in counties and municipalities. I introduced some legislation, and then in the beginning of the term, and I knew it was really going to be a work in progress. And since then, we had a great chance to. I worked with the Illinois Municipal League, the Association of County Board Members, the County Treasurers Association, the Municipal Treasurers Association. We held several conference calls. I visited some regional meetings and heard from the actual people who do this work on a day-to-day basis, the city and county treasurers, county board members who receive the reports. And we put together, we rewrote the entire bill, put together a very substantive amendment around the idea that one of the biggest challenges people brought back was we could make some requirements for reviews to happen and for checks to happen. But oftentimes, if you don't have any experience reading financial documents, you're not going to know what to look for. And so those reviews might be, not very productive if you're looking at a paper and not knowing what to read. So we set up a opportunity for cities and counties to establish a finance and audit committee that includes members of the council or the board, it could include the treasurer, could include anybody in a financial department in those organizations, and members of the public who may have a particular interest in municipal or county government, maybe a particular skill in financial transactions and reading those kinds of reports. And this audit committee then is charged with a series of requirements to review the financial transactions, review the treasurer's books semi-annually, to review a list of banks where accounts are held and what those accounts are, review whether accounts in that semi-annual period were opened or closed or transferred or renamed, or anything that happens there. Also then to in greater detail review the audit, review the management letter that presents the findings of the audit, whether they're material or just noted, and respond to those in a public way. So respond to those and address to the community. The audit found that we had deficiencies in these 3 or 4 areas, and either here's an explanation of those deficiencies or here's the plan of action that we have to correct that. So to add a little bit of a kind of closing the loop after the report has been delivered, to make sure that it doesn't just sit on a shelf and collect dust. But doing so kind of with a sensitivity of the fact that if we just make a requirement that everybody has to read every page of the audit, that might not really get us to our desired outcome either. Because you and I could sit down and read an audit and maybe miss some things that we're not aware of are part of a standard audit, miss some of those red flags. So this gives them the flexibility to incorporate people who have financial experience, people who have a specific interest, whether they're on the council, whether they're an employee of the city or county, or whether they're a member of the public. So I think it really adds in some extra oversight and adds some transparency to the whole process of financial record keeping and reporting.
What was the number for that bill? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was House Bill 1563. And that passed the House, and so both of those have been sent to the Senate. The two that I was the chief sponsor of have been sent to the Senate, and Senator Bivens is signed on as the chief Senate sponsor of each of those.
Senator Bivens had a bill that, if I recall, required reporting improprieties or irregularities for investigation by local state's attorney's office. We'd done some reporting before, first involving some village, Linden. That there seemed to be concern that since there's no real state audit of the books, that it's contract out to a local auditor or accountant, and could be a cozy relationship involved there. The accountant doesn't want to lose the account, so they say you might want to straighten out this and straighten out that, but no requirement that if it even borders on illegality that it has to be reported. And he had a bill that would have required that. Do you know what the status of that is?
You know, I'm not sure. After this week, the Senate's deadline will have elapsed, and I was going to take a look at all of Senator Bivens' bills because a lot of them have some kind of local tie. So I've signed on to be the House sponsor of a couple of those, and we'll see what moves out of the Senate this week. And I plan to look at all his bills and sign on to those that pass.
Just to you have been a part of a local government, the Lee County Board, and you were actually part of the Finance Committee.
Right.
In reflecting on that, and now that you're on the outside, did they have pretty good procedures? They had the same accounting firm as the city of Dixon, and they've had them for a long time. But are you satisfied with the internal controls at Lee County?
You know, the audit for the years that I was on the board was presented to the Finance Committee in greater detail. You know, we always had an explanation. We read through the audit management letter together. They noted some findings in internal controls, and you know, some of that was in the handling of petty cash in small departments. You know, we tried to, from a personnel policy, put in place some things that limited the amount of money that could be kept in those places. Some of those audit findings, and this is why I said in the response to the audit or the management letter that there could be some explanations for this is a finding. We can't really get out of this unless we hire a new person, and we can't afford to hire a new person to watch over $100 in petty cash. But I was always comfortable on the Lee County Board with the level of review we do at the committee level and then bring it to the full board too. We kept that document on hand and really used it quite a bit throughout the year, if for no other purpose than to make comparisons to current year's spending based on the prior year's audit. Because you know that when we put together the budget versus actual, there's usually discrepancies in that. Money gets returned, extra money gets spent in areas. And so we always use the audit as a place to go back and check year over year spending to say what was actually expended in the past year. So that the audit was incorporated in a lot of the decisions we made. I think it could get better though, and that's, you know, kind of the idea behind setting this Finance and Audit Committee would have allowed us to have a committee where maybe we asked a couple of members of the community to come in and serve on this and hear the same audit explanation that we heard and review the same management letter that we read. And, you know, somebody who has a financial background in the community may have had different questions to ask, or may have had different things to point out, notice different aspects of the audit. I think that would have helped all of us learn a little bit more about what to look for, what's part of a standard audit, and how maybe the county was similar to or dissimilar to that.
I got a question about pensions, if I could. Pensions, especially for teachers, they increase a lot in the last few years. There's that 6% that they increase. Some years ago it was 20%, now it's 6%. And a lot of people say that's because, as you well know, the state picks up the employer portion of teacher and administrator pensions. I think your previous position is you don't want to change that at least right away, but it seems like a lot of people, like the Illinois Policy Institute, says we have to do this as soon as possible, have the actual districts pay the cost of pensions, like the IMRF, which is much more successful than the state picking up where there isn't that feeling of accountability, you don't have to pay for the consequences of your decisions.
Right.
What do you think on that?
Right.
Now?
So my position has been that I don't think it's appropriate to transfer our unfunded liability to local districts in the form of a cost shift to make up for payments that the state has skipped in the past. I think the only thing that does is bail out the state by pushing the responsibility on. I have said, though, that I think there's a sound argument to be made in aligning the ability to enter into contracts with the responsibility to keep those contracts and make those contracts whole. There have been a couple of proposals floated on the state level, nothing really in legislation form yet, but things around the idea of maybe taking today's levels, and the state would still make a pension payment based on today's salary levels, but any future increases, that employer share of those increases would be borne by school districts that gave those increases. That may be a way to further incentivize districts to to negotiate strongly and to make sure that they have the financial resources to make those payments.
I just want to make sure I understand. So if you're in favor of some, like if a district's increased it by so much in the last few years, maybe even any increase in the last few years, would you consider that maybe the districts start picking up the consequences of those decisions rather than all the rest of the districts in the state? You're open to that kind of thing?
I'm open to saying, you know, from this point forward, if you're going to increase the levels, I'm open to saying that those costs might come back in whole or in part to a district. What I don't think should happen is the state has at least $100 billion in unfunded liability right now, and I think the state has put themselves in that position. I don't think it's fair to transfer that and to say we haven't made pension payments over the series of years, and we set benefit levels and we set a lot of the rules of the game, but now we're going to pass along the expense or the liability to districts to make up for the fact that we've underfunded pensions by so much over the last few years.
Do you have a sense that that's general consensus in the legislature?
No, it's not a general consensus right now in the legislature. There are a lot of it is driven by where your district is, because there are certain districts who maybe are benefiting more from the fact that the state's picking it up. If you have higher salaries, you're going to benefit more in real dollars from that percentage pickup than smaller districts with smaller number of employees or lower salaries are. You have some districts that are in a stable financial position, cash position, to be able to absorb some of those changes. A couple percent this way, a couple percent that way would be reasonable for them. And you have other districts that are already in the red or already teetering on the verge of financial stability. So there really isn't a consensus in the Assembly right now about how to handle this idea of cost shifting from the state to the local districts.
So just want to make sure, because this has become a big issue, and
Yeah.
the 6% increase at the end, in most professions, at least that I've looked at, don't have this kind of thing. Is that a big part of the problem? I mean, these increases at the end that influence the pension, which can, in one case in Rock Falls, is tens of thousands more a year for a former superintendent in Rock Falls because of this fact. So that definitely needs to be reformed. Does that system offend some people? Does that offend you?
I don't support that idea of manipulating your salary at the end of your career specifically with the purpose of giving a higher pension. I think there are a couple. I don't know what the total state financial impact of that kind of maneuver is. That might be a difficult number to come by, but we could see examples on a case-by-case basis where, in this case, the person's salary increased by so much. There are a couple ways that you can address that. The state did it several years ago by limiting the percentage that you could do at the end of career bonuses. But also you could just expand the time frame on which the pensionable salary is calculated. So right now I think it's the 3 years, and I'm not sure what the specifics are on this, but it's a narrower window.
Right.
You could use something, moving it more towards a Social Security type model where you're looking at, I think, 40 quarters on that, the average of course.
Looking at more years as opposed to the 4 key years where
right,
your highest paid in the last 10 years. Gotcha.
So look at, average it out over the last 10 years. Something like that could lead to a little bit more stability.
January 2011. It still has a little less than 2 years to go. What's your feeling on what's going to happen there, and what's your position on it?
I'd support the repeal of the state sales tax, or allowing it to expire. I think it's
income tax.
The income tax. Yes, I think it's been a economic negative for the state. We haven't met the projections, I think, that some people thought we might be able to take that money and use it to pay down old bills, use it to address some of our growing expenses in the pension area. We really haven't done those things with it. It's just kind of been absorbed in this ever-growing state budget. And I think having a lower overall tax rate would help us make us more competitive with neighboring states and really states across the country in terms of attracting new investment, new businesses, and expansion of existing businesses in the state of Illinois.
How does the state pay off its debts then and pay off those overdue bills? What are they up to? 8 or 9?
$9 billion, yeah. $9 billion now. You know, we've been fighting hard this year, and we're in budget negotiations right now. We've set a total revenue number, and now we negotiate kind of these above-the-line deductions from that. Our caucus has been negotiating hard that we put a significant portion of that into paying down those old bills. Last year we fought for and got $800 million towards that. That's a small percentage, but it was better than what it had been in previous years, which was no deduction above the line. We're again fighting for that, at least that. We're fighting that every dollar that comes in above what we project as our revenue number for the year, every dollar of that would go to pay down old bills. So we're working hard, I think, within our existing revenue streams to pay down those bills in a responsible way.
Well, I'm still waiting for my state income tax return. When you get back, could you look into that? At the end of the 9-day teacher strike here in Dixon, perhaps at our urging, the school board did release the contract the day before they voted on it. Mm-hmm. We understand there's been a bill filed as well. We had an editorial about it that would require maybe 30 days or something like that before a public body could vote on a public employee contract. Would have to reveal to the public and have public hearings and whatnot. I asked you about this question when we had the one-man debate last fall, and you said you thought it was just okay if the school board be accountable because they're elected by the people and the people didn't like it and they can throw them out. Mm-hmm. Now that we've been through that in Dixon with a lot of interest in that contract, how do you feel about making those those proposed contracts, tentative contracts, available to the public before a vote?
Yeah, so I guess I have a little bit of mixed feelings on that, and I'll tell you why. I think that the nature of negotiations is often that they're done with multiple offers back and forth between two parties, which, you know, the art of negotiation sometimes is to, you know, give on this and to hold fast on that, or to ask for a big number there and compromise down to a number that's lower than that. So I think the nature of negotiations kind of requires some level of privacy, because each side has what they're publicly asking for and what they're privately willing to compromise for, and that kind of can change and shift a little bit as the negotiations proceed. As far as you know, publication of contracts prior to a vote, so a final offer contract, I think there is more credibility to making those public in advance of the contracts being ratified. Many times, you know, whether it's a city, a school district, whoever it might be, you know, the part of the obligation or the privilege of citizens is to be able to lobby their elected officials and be able to ask them to vote yes, to vote no on a given issue. And I think for a contract matter, that could give the public a little bit of participation in the process by being able to say, listen, the terms of this deal, I don't support, you know, vote yes, vote no on it, whatever the case might be. On the state level too, you know, we see from the General Assembly side the fact that the governor enters into contracts with state employees, and you know, oftentimes makes contractual promises that then are passed on to the General Assembly to appropriate the money for. And it puts us in a difficult position, not having much information about the details of the contract when it's offered and when it's accepted. I think that during the negotiation, the back and forth part, I think privacy should stand there because of the nature of negotiations. But when there's an offer made, a formal offer made, or you know, an offer that reaches a certain level of permanence, it should be made public or disclosed at least to those who are interested stakeholders.
I think the records and meetings law at this point, give the negotiating parties that right to privacy.
Right.
Now, in the case of Dixon, both the teachers and the school board were, I thought, pretty generous in laying out to the public, here's what we've offered, and you decide whether it's fair or whether it's not. They didn't have to do that, but they did.
Sometimes that's part of negotiations
exactly.
too. They wanted to
bring the pressure
right,
on.
Right.
Exactly. But after they've had a tentative agreement where there's no real strategic advantage to it being private. I mean that's sort of where we think that the law will require that there be some sort of public exposure to the terms of the contract before a vote. So as you say, citizens have a right to lobby their.
And I would support that. I think it's kind of defining where in the process the document should become public, and there might be some input on where the right step is there. And then also on the timing issue, I think 30 days is probably too long.
Yeah,
we could have had a 30-day strike. I mean,
exactly.
In a case like that, you're not going to go back to work until the contract's been accepted, and so there's probably some negotiation to be had there too about what's the appropriate amount of time for something to be disclosed, recognizing that you could very well be in a strike situation with people off work.
But didn't Dixon take some time to get their contract out that was agreed on by the two parties? I mean, it was some days.
They settled it on Thursday or Friday, and then they released it on Tuesday after teachers voted on Monday.
Teachers voted Monday, they released it Tuesday, and so there was about 24 hours before the board.
And the board voted Wednesday, but they had settled it the previous
week.
Friday or no, wasn't that?
Well, no, not a week, but the previous week.
Yeah, I think they went back to school on a Thursday.
Maybe.
Because they were in.
They went ahead and went back to school after they'd come to a tentative agreement, even before it had been ratified. But they were all eager to go back to school.
So the public got 24 hours lead time?
Right.
Okay. Is that enough time?
I don't know. I'd be open to negotiations on that, to maybe hear from what people have an expectation of. Things can be disseminated a lot more quickly these days than in the past.
Yeah.
But 24 hours, I don't know. I wouldn't want to prolong a strike because of a requirement like this. Prolong a work stoppage.
They had gone back to work.
Right.
And the teachers gone back.
They didn't
on
wait
Thursday, right?
They didn't wait for ratification before they went back to work.
They had the tentative one.
Yeah.
The tentative agreement, yeah.
So it wasn't affecting. They weren't still out picketing. And
so yeah,
they
then
weren't at home.
Right. That would be wouldn't be holding yourself up to have a requirement. Like
the strike. They took a few days. I mean, the strike was ended, and the leadership had agreed on something, although the membership hadn't, and we were told we can't know what was in that, and the public was told they can't know what.
Yeah, because we filed a public records request, and they had 5 working days to comply. And I think maybe Wednesday would have been the 5th day, but they got it on Thursday. And we posted the document online, didn't we? So that people were able to to see it the day before. So
I think nearly 100 people, maybe the high 90s, had looked at it at one point within, I don't know, 12 hours of it going up. So a lot of people. Comparatively.
Yeah. I mean, it was a high profile deal. People were very very curious to see what had been negotiated and agreed to, and
parents especially, they were eager to get their kids back at school.
What about the gun issue? As far as obviously Tim Bivens has taken a leadership role, and I don't know if the final has been released today, but there was a provision there that's drawn some reaction from the NRA that it would make Tim Bivens doesn't like the words carve out, but there would be a different standard applied to Cook County and Chicago, where you'd have to get endorsement from law enforcement to carry a concealed carry permit, whereas in the rest of the state you would go through the state police, but you don't have to go through any extra layer. Do you think there should be a different standard for getting a concealed carry permit? The NRA says the Second Amendment should apply to everybody. It shouldn't be a different standard from Cook County or Chicago to the rest of the state. How do you feel about that?
So I'd like there to be one statewide standard, but I also recognize the fact that in order to get anything done in Springfield, we have to have 71 votes on this bill because it preempts home rule authorities. We have to have a super majority of folks behind this, and I would certainly prefer there to be a statewide standard that was permissive, that said that if you meet a series of criteria, that the state police shall issue you a permit, and you shouldn't have to worry about what district you're in to do that. However, we've seen through a number of votes in the House, at least, that those proposals don't receive the sufficient number of votes to pass. And so this is one of those situations where, you know, although myself and a majority of my colleagues feel the same way, not a supermajority doesn't feel that way. And because of the high threshold that's established on this, I think we might have to be open to having some of those discussions of compromise in order to get a bill passed.
State parks in your district, is White Pines in your district? I'm trying to imagine the lines as they
White Pines and Loudon, and Shabanaw Lake. I think that's the only three.
Castle Rock, maybe?
Oh, Castle Rock too.
Castle
yeah.
Rock,
Yep.
is it?
Yep.
So the Secretary of State began charging that $2 extra fee. Was it the beginning of the year? And that money is supposed to go to state parks. Have you heard anything about the distribution of that and any positive impact of that on the?
You know, I haven't heard. I've heard from people supportive of the state parks. I mean, a wonderful resource that we have in this area, generates significant economic activity during all seasons. Really looking at some of the versatility of those parks. I haven't heard anything about the distribution of the newly charged fee.
We had advocated that it might not be a bad idea to charge entrance fees. We as an editorial board, and certain candidates we brought that idea up with weren't too thrilled about it. But do you have any particular thoughts on that as far as preserving and keeping up and maintaining the functionality and the safety of state parks?
I think we already pay for the state parks. You know, it's supposed to be part of our state taxes and those resources that the state has for that. Some state parks do charge entrance fees. They charge user fees. They charge fees for various services within the park. I think those are reasonable to do, but I think the benefit of having public parks that are funded by taxpayer dollars and don't have a specific user fee makes them open and accessible to the community at any time, because they're really a community-held resource. I don't think that because we're facing budgetary pressures in other areas of state government that we should start charging again for services that were previously intended to be a part of our overall tax.
Of course, it got to the point where Blagojevich closed down a number of parks.
And we saw the backlash from that. I mean, people, these are community treasures, and people have a very strong sense of pride to them, and they're very important to local economies.
Have you ever talked to Michael Madigan?
I have, yeah. Just, you know, hello, how are you?
Okay, brief greetings.
Yeah.
I just wondered.
What's your observation of him?
You know what? I don't have much observation. I mean, honestly, I'm a freshman in the minority party. You know, I run across him in the hallway, I say hello, but I'm not. I'm certainly not privy to meetings in which you know, he's a part of or making negotiations.
Don't you want to say something really nasty about the way he operates?
You know, it's an interesting power structure there. It's been in place for such a long time too. Especially as a freshman, you know, I'm keeping my eyes and ears open and trying to get a feel for the way the things operate, and you know, coming into days in session, what to expect and how to expect certain measures to proceed. So there's a lot of learning to have happen down there, and I'm trying to do a little bit more of that before I make judgments on my colleagues.
Especially those in power.
Yes.
Yeah. How did your service as a county board prepare you, if at all, for the legislature? I mean, is there any parallel there?
Yeah, there are parallels. We had some really hot issues in the county board level. Wind turbines were certainly a big one. We heard from truck stop was absolutely. The truck stop was a big one.
Travel plaza.
Call it what you will.
The truck stop.
You know, that prepared me. I think those kind of issues prepared me a little bit for the constituent input. We had quite a few people who'd attend those meetings, who were very vocal about their positions, who shared resources, who called and emailed and stopped you when you're walking around to talk to you about those issues. And so it prepared me a little bit for the fact that now on the state level, there's just that many more issues that people are aware of and are following. So helped a little bit and kind of get used to constituent relationships. And it also taught me, you know, that body up there also is quite large at the county board level. You know, we had 28 members when I was when I was serving. And
now it's a svelte.
Yeah, no, it's right. I pushed and pushed, and all I could get it down to was 24.
You wanted it at 20, right?
I wanted it as low. Yeah, I wanted it.
Or even lower, maybe.
Yeah.
I remember that you wanted it low.
That got voted down, and we ended up going to 24. But it prepared me a little bit too for you know, working with colleagues around trying to get a sense for, you know, which bills were going to be controversial, which bills weren't going to be controversial, maybe the different perspectives that certain people brought to those votes before they happened. So it prepared me, I think, on that level too of working in a body like that, where you and the people surrounding you each have the equal share of decision-making authority, and some of the challenges and issues that brings up. I also just got a chance to, you know, to work on things like the county audit, the budget, work in public financial settings, work in settings that, you know, are subject to Open Meetings Act, records that are kept, you know, under state records laws. So working kind of in a public capacity like that is very much different than working in the private sector, as you all know. I mean, you don't have to publish minutes from every meeting that you go to. You don't have to have public notice of those things, and so it's different, and it you know, it impacts your thought process a little bit, because there is usually requirements about lead time for posting of things and for publications, and things take a little longer when they're subject to those. And so I think kind of work on the county board helped me get a sense for how to operate in a public body.
Are you hearing from people in Dixon, Lee County on a daily basis, a weekly basis?
A daily basis for sure. We hear significant input from constituents, especially while we're in session. Again, these associations I was talking about, they do a great job of mobilizing their members, and that's all these associations are, just a group of members. I mean, they have maybe 50 members in Lee County or 5,000 members in Lee County, and they pump out email blasts to them, and we get email is certainly the biggest way that we get communicated with, but there's still a lot of phone calls coming into the district office and down to Springfield. Every day that I've been down in Springfield, I think we've had constituents from the district down there for one issue and another, sometimes in big groups and sometimes just one or two. So I hear from constituents absolutely every day.
What are some of the services that your office over in Rochelle now, are able to provide to the constituents, and also, you know, since you've got the senator that covers your district, and Jim Saich has got his office here, so will Dixon people more likely go to him, or like, do you have some sort of an informal agreement that they could deal through his office if they wanted to get a message to you, or do you like people to get a hold of your office in Rochelle?
We still have, I think people would, if they're going to drop by in person, they'd probably go to Senator Bivens' office, but we still get a lot of phone calls and emails from people who are Dixon constituents who, you know, have an issue they'd like us to look into. Some of the bigger things, and it's kind of interesting, just the wide variety of constituent cases that come up. I'd say the biggest issue we deal with is just questions of who to contact about something. And oftentimes it's some clarification on, is this a local government issue, a state issue, a federal issue? You know, what department or what bureau or association handles this, you know, I got a notice sent to me about this, who am I supposed to call about that? We do a lot of just trying to put people in touch with the right agencies. There are also a number of requests around veterans issues. And then a lot of times, you know, we're trying to link people up with the Department of Veterans Affairs or a federal contact on some of those issues. But there are state programs too that are designed to, you know, promote hiring of veterans, or allowances that happen while people are deployed overseas, and we help them kind of navigate some of those programs. And then we've also had, you know, some tax questions, things that deal with the Department of Revenue, questions about, you know, what's owed to them or what they owe to the state, and how those things might be handled.
We've done some coverage of just the functionality of government. Of course, the Dixon City Hall scandal. We looked at reported on the Commission form of government versus some others, and now the city is getting a little more serious about that. Davey here has had a series on Under the Radar about township government and its functionality versus, are there other alternatives? We live in a state that has the most number of units of government in the nation, but yet it seems like maybe the legislature is not of a mind to do any serious investigation of whether or not some reforms and some streamlining can be done. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've actually talked about this a few times with some of my colleagues in the legislature, and there's a commission that I was just invited to be a part of that looks at local government consolidation. And I can get you the specific name of it. It's escaping me right now. We haven't met yet. That's why I'm not that familiar with it. They're trying to put together this group that said we're gonna do this. But looking at the fact that not to a township level, I think township governments have they have a number of responsibilities.
Though I will mention, there are counties in southern Illinois.
That's right.
That do not have township government, and they fulfill all the same obligations of township government, which are to assess taxes, which are to take care of roads, and which are, what's the third one?
They administer public assistance.
Assistance.
Administer public assistance.
Three things.
And rather than townships, they do it with road districts, and then county officials do the other things.
The assistance, and the
public
assessment.
assistance and the assessment. So it can be done with significantly fewer people. The local bureaucracy, township, with all these different people, these trustees and the supervisors, it's greatly reduced.
From 199 officials, county and township
in Lee County.
To, and we did the number, but it's about 20 or 30, about 30 in Morgan County, which is an example of a county. It's the same size as Lee County.
We got 22 townships.
We have 22 townships. They have 10 road districts in Morgan County, which is where Jacksonville is, and also where he went to college. And 10 districts, in each district they have one elected road commissioner and elected clerk. Of course, there's many more officials in Lee County, and it's the same population county. Yet we have 199 elected officials, county and township, here in this county versus about 30 in Morgan County. And I guess the question is, and you're a big believer in technology, no question about that. So, okay, if maybe the roads stay separate, maybe fewer districts, but would it make sense to do assessment and general assistance at the county level rather than having 22 welfare agencies around the county, having one that's operated out of the courthouse and assessment? Would you be absolutely opposed to moving in that direction for assessment and
I wouldn't be absolutely opposed to it, no. But I think that sometimes people think we could, eliminate the townships and suddenly all these expenses go away. Still, somebody's got to do the roads, and we still have to have people who do those. We have some examples of what I think is, a great first step to take in multi-township assessment districts, where you share the assessment duties among a couple of townships together. On the distribution of public assistance, one of the difficulties there is geography, and that if you live in a part of the county that's far away from a courthouse, you're somebody who, relying on public assistance, doesn't really have the ability to have travel budgets that allow for going back and forth regularly. So geography is important, I think, to the delivery of those services effectively.
But Tom, those people are getting in their cars and going 15 or 20 miles to get their groceries.
They may be.
Yeah,
they may be.
They're in these far-flung areas.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I wouldn't close the door to these things. I just think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that we would have no lack of convenience if Dixon Township, moved their offices into the courthouse. But if everybody had to come into the courthouse, it would be a really different scenario than to go in.
So you wouldn't close the door to the possibility of consolidating some functions.
I think it makes sense. Like the thing that some of them are doing right now in sharing those responsibilities, the multi-township assessment districts are a good example of that. I think there's opportunities for road work to have some intergovernmental agreements between townships to share equipment. That'll happen there. These are approachable steps that I think you can take to get some of those efficiencies without having what would be a very complicated system of making statewide changes to the township system. One of the other things we're going to look at on this local government consolidation committee or commission is all the other taxing bodies that exist. I mean, we talk about townships a lot, but there are any number of local commissions for park districts, for water reclamation districts. They have mosquito abatement districts. They have forest preserve districts. We have a list, and especially in some of the more populated counties, of 20, 25 different districts that exist from a local government level, and we're really looking for ways to address some of those that are incredibly small, that maybe do one specific thing, serve a very small number of people, looking for a way that maybe we can roll those duties in with another, whether it's a municipal government, a county government, or an agency that's really pursuing a similar mission at a time. I think we have a real opportunity to make changes there without having some of the larger, more complicated discussions about how do we change more core services that really affect a lot of people. Township roads are used by millions of people every day, and that's a lot harder to move that around than it would be to move the mosquito abatement tasks to somebody who's in a different unit of government.
Yeah, it's a politically difficult thing to do too. Was people found out Governor Daniels in Indiana, who made it his #1 legislative priority, and couldn't get it done, even though he had a very heavy Republican majorities. Yeah. But the township government is pretty well organized. Political.
They are. And the other interesting thing about the discussion on townships, and really the discussion of your relationship with any level of government, is that it drastically changes based on where you are in the state of Illinois. That your experience with government is largely dictated by where you live, and sometimes you can drive down a block and see your congressman's office and your senator's office, and a couple of state agencies all within a matter of a mile. In some places you got to drive 30 miles to find the nearest township building. And so when you look at trying to deliver services to people in Illinois, it changes based on where you live.
Are you satisfied with Governor Quinn's announcement of the various road and bridge projects for the next 5 or 6 years? Do you take a look at the ones that they plan for? In your district?
I did. I got a great breakdown of all the projects in the district, and I think it's a very positive investment in local infrastructure. We have road projects in there, rail projects in there. There's some money for public transportation. I feel like it's going to help strengthen this area, which already has a very impressive transportation network through this northern Illinois area. I think it'll help us link some of those together better, by adding higher capacity roads in high traffic areas, or roads that can carry a higher weight limits, by improving some of the rail access that we have, especially around the intermodal facility in Rochelle, expanding that out. Because when you look at the land we have around here, oftentimes it's we're pretty safe from tornadoes and earthquakes. We don't have to worry about hurricanes, and we're fairly stable from a climate perspective, at least for buildings, not for us sometimes. But it's a pretty safe place to build, and once you connect those parcels of land with infrastructure, those suddenly increase in value incredibly. So having that kind of network is, I think, really key to this area, and I was pleased to see the investment schedule in the next 5 years that will, I think, further strengthen that advantage that we have.
Of course, you have the good fortune of representing Rochelle, which is had some positive economic things happen over the years, and we had the author of Boomtown USA come and speak at Sauk Valley College, and Jason Anderson as well came and gave a presentation last fall. And the Nippon Shario opened fairly recently. What do you see your role as far as economic development for communities like Rochelle, Dixon, and the other communities?
Well, we're trying to be supportive from an infrastructure perspective, lobbying for the inclusion of certain projects, certain priority projects, serving as a connection between projects that receive state funding and local funding and federal funding. I've visited sites in Rochelle with Congressman Kinzinger talking about some of the federal road money that might be available for infrastructure improvements there. We also have been supportive of applications to for state incentive programs through the DCEO. There are ways that we can just help put people in contact with one another, help be supportive of the mission, promote and stress the importance of government investment in those kind of infrastructure projects in that area. And we'll continue to push to make Illinois a little bit more business friendly, and especially in terms of things like workers' compensation rates, and some of the regulations that when somebody wants to make a new investment in the state, that take a significant amount of time for those applications to be processed. Some of the things we've done through the office is just try to help move those processes along a little bit more, and show that we have a strong, united local support for those kind of projects.
One of the real advantages of being in the House is you never have to stop campaigning, because you've got a re-election campaign coming up next year,
I know.
already. So here we go. Do you have a campaign organization that stays in effect year-round, or how does that work?
Well, I guess I'm the campaign organization at this point.
Okay.
I'm really focused so much right now on the session and the business that we have at hand. I know we're going to have to get to the campaign season later this year, but for right now, you've got to make the most of the time that you aren't actively campaigning, and so I'm trying to do that now and to try to be efficient on that. We'll get together. We still do. Try to organize a fundraiser at some point, and still try to communicate with some people who were supportive before. But at this point, it's probably 2% of my time is spent just processing things like that. That'll pick up later this year. In September we'll have to go around and start circulating petitions. September of this year, circulating petitions to be on next year's ballot. So that'll pick up quickly, and that's part of the reality of being in a 2-year term, is that you've got to be able to quickly make those transitions back and forth.
Imagine being in Congress and having,
I know.
That'd be fundraising.
Yeah.
That'd be fundraising all the time.
It's a ton of fundraising, and they have especially Adam Kinzinger is a huge district geographically.
Yeah.
It just takes forever. That might be one of the other things I've been surprised about through this, is just how much time I spend in the car. It's a lot of driving to Springfield and back, and then just to get around the district. It's like 65 miles to the edge of the district from here to Sandwich, and so everywhere you go, it's at least a half-hour drive, seems like.
Oh, you go all the way to Sandwich. Oh, that's a ways.
And then up to north of Byron, Davis Junction area, and south to Mendota.
Yeah, Shaw has a newspaper in Sandwich.
Yeah,
That's
right. The Valley Free Press.
We own that.
I've met with them
Exactly.
before.
You spoke about driving, and of course the tollway.
Yeah.
Because that goes from basically one side of your district to the other.
I've probably been the biggest supporter of the tollway in the past few months.
Our editorial board has advocated for a few things regarding the tollway. One, of course, between Dixon and Rochelle, there's no entrance or exit. There's no way to get off. It's 22 miles, which is the longest stretch in the state of Illinois. I checked the map. It's the longest stretch without entrance ramps or exit ramps. And we've advocated for, maybe Franklin Grove, maybe Ashton, if people could get on and off there, maybe that would help with economic development. Additionally, we pointed out that the tollway board, which was supposed to, when it was set up, be sort of geographically set. So you'd have someone representing each area and whatnot, and the tollway is strictly a non-Chicago board. It's a non-Chicago facility. There's no toll highways in Chicago from this tollway, but yet Governor Quinn has got 2 or 3 Chicagoans on the tollway board, and there aren't any that are any closer than Rockford, I think, to the Sauk Valley. There's none from Whiteside County, no tollway board members from Lee County, none from Ogle County. Just your comments on that? You see that?
Well, I think it'd be great if we had some better representation on the tollway board, and that might lead us to have more discussions about adding some access in this area. When you look at adding a ramp, whether it's in Ashton or Franklin Grove, whatever it might be, again, this is one of those things where you're going to dramatically increase the value of that land by the fact that they now have access to this transportation network, which is good and reliable and efficient. And you think about Ashton, you've got Crest Foods there as a major trucking company that's always bringing in and out goods. They certainly would benefit from access to transportation in a more efficient way. But it would also open up, I think, development on either side, from the east side of Dixon, bringing in that direction, from the west side of Rochelle, coming back in this direction. The intermodal facility, the rail intermodal facility, already sits to the west side of Rochelle. You might be able to further expand development around that facility coming to the west, though, because right now all that traffic has to go east, come through, and they've made some improvements there to get around Rochelle and to access the interstate more efficiently. But I think a midpoint access would be great for that community that was directly benefited from it, but it would also help Dixon and Rochelle as a little bit larger industrial centers to grow in that direction, knowing that you have kind of this redundancy or an option going either way, going east or west. You've got a convenient entrance point to the interstate.
You could put a travel plaza at that interchange.
That's what John Nicholson would call it.
Well, yeah, but the county could invest in that, again, extending utilities and whatnot. There would be an expense there that if the utilities were there and a developer didn't have to go through that
right.
For economic development purposes, that would make sense.
Right, and I think there'd be high traffic count. I mean, we have a great traffic count out here. We expect to see pretty similar numbers there, plus some of this on and off traffic that might happen.
So those are just a couple of the ideas on that, but then how does one go about to presenting them to the tollway board and maybe trying to get some buy-in?
Yeah, I think it's probably working with your bigger influences there are going to be, the community itself stands to benefit from it, but I think your bigger influences come from the industrial parks in Dixon and in Rochelle. If there are projects that are looking to come to this area and maybe rely heavily on that kind of transportation, that can be included in those kind of negotiations. As we look at what our infrastructure priorities are, we talk about these 5-year infrastructure investment plans. Maybe that gets put on the radar at least for a someday project, and then you do some of the work for it. I think I've heard numbers before, and I can't remember what they are, but they have some ideas for here's the rough cost of adding an interchange onto an interstate system, and what you might be able to expect in terms of what the traffic volume around those areas will be. But it's a little bit of a leap of faith, knowing that you're going to make a big investment in the area, and then you've got to follow through with the development of the now valuable property that lies around it. And it's got to be more than a truck stop or a travel plaza. You've got to have some industrial tenants that are going to have significant traffic over the long term, adding that kind of economic benefit. So it kind of takes a few of those pieces, I think, coming together to say now we're at a point where this is a wise investment to make. I know people are talking about it though, in Rochelle especially, trying to find a western access point to open up for development a lot of that land that sits around the intermodal facility today. Well, it's we have about 5 weeks left in the legislature. We adjourn probably at midnight on the 31st of May. It usually tends to be a pretty late session that time, and we have really all the major issues that we identified at the beginning of the legislative session still exist today. Legislation regarding concealed carry is probably one of the things that has a specific deadline to it. The state budget, we're beginning the process of that. I'm on a Human Services Appropriations Committee, and we've heard testimony from a variety of departments with their proposals. The governor's made his budget proposal, but we have a long way to go on settling what the numbers are that are going to be allocated to each appropriations committee and how those will be broken down. We have a significant amount of work left on the state budget, with pressures from every direction, and with a lot of people fighting over a scarce number of resources there. Pension reform still looms. We've voted through a number of proposals there, but we don't have a comprehensive bill on that yet. And even if we had one in the House, they might not even take it in the Senate. So we have a lot of that left to negotiate, is how we can find a bill that'll pass both chambers and make it to the governor. So as the next 5 weeks go, I'm sure we'll hear quite a bit from constituents about some of these issues. And hopefully we can come to some sort of consensus on these big ticket items, because they have such a dramatic impact, a day-to-day impact on people in the state of Illinois. So we're going to work hard for the next 5 weeks, and I'll come talk to you after that. We'll see what we got accomplished.
Good. Maybe we can get you and Senator Bivens to sit down together.
Yeah, that would be nice. Be nice.
Fab. All right.
Sounds good.
Thanks very much.